All right, trigger warning. This episode contains disturbing content, including violence against children and discussions of cult-related beliefs. Listener discretion is advised. Thank you for joining me. So what do you get when a beauty pageant mom starts calling herself a god, marries a self-proclaimed prophet, and declares her own kids are zombies possessed by evil spirits? You get 5 bodies, 2 children buried in the backyard, a string of mysterious deaths, and a trail of apocalyptic delusion that led straight to prison. This isn't a cult from the 60s. This is suburban America in the 2020s. Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell turned love, religion, and motherhood into something monstrous. And if you've never heard their story, you're about to. Welcome to Creepalachia. I really appreciate you joining us this evening for this awful true crime story that is just now not wrapping up. There's a trial in June, but there's already been 2 other trials that we're going to mention, but it's about Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, and this one is crazy. I mean, I had to fact check all of this like 3 times for each statement because it is that insane to just, for this to just be out there and to be a thing. But it is. So, but again, before we get started, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to Creepalachia if you haven't already, and buckle up for this first act. Our story begins not in a dim cult compound or in a remote wilderness, but in the sunny suburbs of America. Lori Vallow seemed, for many years, like an ordinary wife and mother. In 2016, she married Charles Vallow, a successful businessman, and together they raised their daughter, Tylee Ryan, from a previous marriage. And in 2014, they lovingly adopted Joshua J.J. Vallow, Charles's young nephew who had autism. And friends say Lori was patient and devoted to the special needs of her little boy. Now, by all appearances, Lori was a doting mom and Charles was a supportive dad. They lived in Arizona, took family photos at the beach, and smiled at school events. But behind Lori's bright grin lurked the seeds of something dark and bizarre. Now, around 2017, Lori's interests took a drastic turn. She became enthralled by the teachings of Chad Daybell, a small-town novelist and publisher of Doomsday fiction. Chad wrote several books about apocalyptic scenarios and near-death visions, blending Latter-day Saints theology with his own supernatural spin. He painted himself as a prophet preparing for the end of times. And Lori eagerly absorbed these ideas like a sick, sadistic sponge. And friends later recalled that by 2018, Lori was obsessed with Chad's books and podcasts. That year, Lori finally met Chad Daybell in person. The connection was instant. Despite Lori being married to Charles and Chad being married to his longtime wife, Tammy, the two began spending more and more time together, ostensibly to record religious-themed podcasts, but also to share a dangerous spiritual bond. Lori and Chad's beliefs grew increasingly extreme, to say the least. Lori confided in friends that she believed in dark forces, evil spirits, and they were lurking around her and her family. She claimed some people were light and others dark, possessed by evil. Those taken over by darkness, she said, became zombies. Their souls gone, bodies controlled by demons, and in most families, calling someone a zombie would be a goofy Halloween joke. In Lori's world, it was deadly serious. Soon, she was labeling people close to her as demons or zombies. Disturbingly, Lori's 4th husband, Charles Vallow, the very man who had loved and supported her, was now, in her eyes, inhabited by an evil spirit named Ned. Lori began openly referring to Charles as a demon, and even her teenage daughter, Tylee, wasn't safe from these wild accusations. Lori told friends that Tylee, just 16 at the time, had become a zombie. This chilling shift set the stage for everything to come. Charles Vallow was alarmed by his wife's radical transformation, and on January 31st, 2019, he walked into a police station in Gilbert, Arizona, to beg for help. In a police body cam recording, an anxious Charles explains that Lori had become unhinged, as she believed she was a godlike figure preparing for the biblical end of days. He told officers that Lori threatened to kill him if he stood in her way. He tried to even have Lori evaluated at a mental health facility, desperate to pull her back from the brink. Now, in divorce documents filed February 2019, Charles detailed his fears. Lori had said she was a translated being who cannot taste death, sent by God to lead 144,000 into the millennium, and she'd kill him if he interfered with her mission to prepare for Jesus' second coming in July 2020. Instead, we got COVID, but this was no mere midlife crisis or religious phase. It was a full-blown delusion. Charles knew Lori's bizarre new beliefs were a serious danger to himself and the children, and he wasn't wrong, to say the least. For Charles Vallow, the danger became tragically real on July 11th, 2019. That morning, Charles went to Lori's rental home in Chandler, Arizona to pick up their 7-year-old JJ for school. It was a routine act of fatherhood that would be his last. Inside the house, an altercation erupted. Lori's brother, Alex Cox, was also there. And by the time the police arrived, Charles lay dead on the floor. Alex Cox claimed that he had shot Charles in self-defense, alleging that Charles and Lori had been arguing and Charles struck him with a bat. Now, Lori gave police a similar story, conveniently backing up her brother's claim that the killing was justified. Now, to the responding officers, Lori appeared oddly nonchalant for a woman whose husband had just been killed inside her home. She smiled and chatted on the scene, even as Charles's lifeless body was being removed. Now, at first, authorities seemed to accept the self-defense narrative. Charles's death was treated as a domestic dispute gone wrong, but we now know it was part of a far more sinister plot. Charles had warned everyone that would listen that Lori was cray-cray. Now, after his death, those warnings looked like prophecy. Lori didn't even bother to inform Charles's 2 sons from another marriage that their father was gone until over a week later, by text message. It was as if Charles Vallow's life meant nothing to her now. With Charles out of the way, Lori had a new freedom, and Chad Daybell stepped gladly into the void. Within weeks of Charles's killing, Lori abruptly took JJ and Tylee and moved to Rexburg, Idaho, where Chad lived. Alex Cox, the ever-loyal brother and self-appointed protector, also moved into the same apartment complex in Rexburg. The stage was now set in quiet, rural Idaho for the culmination of Lori and Chad's mission. And a shitload of baked potatoes. They openly acted as a couple, unfettered by spouses. Chad's wife, Tammy, was the only remaining obstacle. Now, meanwhile, the violence spreading around Lori and Chad didn't stop with Charles. In October of 2019, Brandon Bordeaux, the ex-husband of Lori's niece, was shot at in front of his Arizona home by a would-be assassin in a Jeep registered to the late Charles Vallow. Brandon survived by sheer luck, and investigators would later tie Alex Cox to this attempted murder as well, suggesting he had been dispatched to eliminate people Lori and Chad saw as problems. It was a pattern. Spouses, relatives, friends, anyone perceived as standing in Lori's way or dark in their warped spiritual vision was at risk of suddenly ending up dead. Now, as Lori and Chad pursued their warped destiny, they spun a web of deceit to those around them. Lori continued to tell friends and family that everything was fine. She even texted Charles's adult sons, claiming their father, who she knew Alex had killed, died of a heart attack. A blatant lie. The truth was far more brutal, and it was about to get worse. Now, by September 2019, Lori Vallow's 2 children, 16-year-old Tylee Ryan and 7-year-old JJ Vallow, were living with her in Rexburg, Idaho. They were innocent, cheerful kids. Tylee, a smart and protective big sister. JJ, a boisterous little boy with brown eyes and a love for popsicles and Blue's Clues. Neither could possibly comprehend the dangerous game their mother was playing. Now, to outside observers, the little family's move to Idaho might have seemed abrupt, but not alarming. Unfortunately, the alarm would soon sound when Tylee and JJ disappeared without a trace. The last known sighting of Tylee Ryan was on September 8th, 2019. That day, Lori, Alex, Tylee, and JJ took a trip to Yellowstone National Park. A photograph from that outing shows Tylee and JJ smiling with their uncle Alex against the backdrop of Yellowstone's geyser. Now in this photo, Tylee's arm is slung around JJ protectively. A final poignant glimpse of the siblings together. Now it would later break investigators' hearts to realize this was effectively Tylee's last day on Earth. Now, what happened after Yellowstone is every parent's nightmare. Investigators believe that sometime in the dark early hours of September 9th, mere hours after this happy photo was taken, Tylee was killed, possibly by Alex Cox, and her body burned and buried in a clandestine grave. Chilling evidence would emerge. Alex Cox's cell phone pinged in Chad Daybell's backyard for about 2 hours on the morning of September 9th. About 14 minutes after Alex left the property, Chad sent an odd text to his wife Tammy. He nonchalantly wrote that he had spotted a big raccoon on their property and shot it, then buried it in their pet cemetery. A raccoon? At dawn? Tammy found this story peculiar, to say the least. Raccoons are mostly nocturnal, but Chad insisted. Now, in hindsight, the raccoon was a ghastly euphemism. Prosecutors later concluded that Chad was burying Tylee's remains, using the raccoon tail to explain to Tammy why he'd been digging in their yard. Tylee Ryan had vanished, but Lori didn't report her missing. In fact, Lori seemed intent on erasing Tylee's existence. When inquisitive friends asked where Tylee was, Lori gave various excuses. Tylee was studying at college or staying with friends, but the horrific truth stayed hidden for now. Now, just over 2 weeks later, it was JJ's turn to vanish. September 22nd, 2019 was the last day anyone saw little JJ alive. A house guest, Melanie Gibb, Lori's close friend from Arizona, was staying at Lori's townhome that weekend. Now, Melanie and her boyfriend David noticed something strange. That night, Alex Cox carried JJ into the house after JJ had already gone to bed, as if moving a sleeping child. The next morning, JJ was nowhere to be seen. Melanie inquired, and Lori served up a chilling explanation. JJ had been, quote, acting like a zombie, end quote. So Uncle Alex took him away. Now imagine being told that about a 7-year-old boy you just saw playing happily the day before. Melanie knew Lori's obsession with evil spirits, but this excuse was too bizarre even for her. Within a day or so, Lori told Melanie that JJ had to go live with Kay Woodcock, JJ's grandmother, because he was behaving like a zombie. Now, it didn't add up, but Lori's calm demeanor overshadowed the violence that likely occurred. Authorities believe JJ was killed that night of September 22nd, suffocated with a plastic bag over his head and duct tape. A truly horrific end for anyone. Lori Vallow now had no living children in her care, but she acted as though nothing was wrong. Now, in October 2019, as neighbors quietly wondered where the kids had gone, tragedy struck again. Tammy Daybell, Chad's wife of nearly 30 years, died suddenly in her sleep on October 19th. Tammy was only 49 and in decent health, but Chad reported that she had a terrible cough and was feeling ill. And that night, Chad claimed he heard Tammy fall out of the bed and die. Shockingly, no autopsy was performed at that time, and the county coroner, apparently trusting Chad's account and the distraught Daybell children's wishes, listed Tammy's death as due to natural causes. Now, in hindsight, this was yet another murder in Lori and Chad's devastating spree. Tammy was likely poisoned or asphyxiated, though it would take months to prove. For now, Tammy's death was a mystery, but one clearing the path for our Doomsday couple to fully unite. And unite they did, only 2 weeks after Tammy died. Think about that. Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow hopped on a plane to Hawaii and quietly got married on a beach in Kauai on November 5th, 2019. The wedding photos, later recovered by investigators, showed Lori in a flowing white dress and flower crown, and Chad beaming in a tropical shirt, both of them barefoot in the sand. They looked, for all the world, like two giddy lovers eloping in paradise. But the reality behind these photos was bone-chilling. The new Mrs. Daybell didn't bother to mention Tylee or JJ to the Hawaiian officiant. As far as anyone could tell, Lori was acting like she had never had a teenage daughter and young son at all. And it was just her 5th marriage. Stupid skank. But back in Idaho and Arizona, extended family were panicking. JJ's grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock, hadn't heard from their grandson in months. Tylee's brother Colby was desperately trying to get in touch with his sister, only to get strange excuses from Lori. Now, on November 26, 2019, Kay Woodcock finally called Rexburg police and requested a welfare check on JJ. Officers went to Lori and Chad's home in Rexburg. Lori coolly told them that JJ was not there. He was in Arizona with her friend Melanie Gibb. Chad backed her up, claiming Lori had no minor children at all. A blatant lie, and the police left. But something didn't sit right. They quickly reached out to Melanie Gibb, who, after an initial hesitation, confirmed JJ was not with her and hadn't been for weeks. This was the moment the alarm bells truly rang for law enforcement. Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow were officially missing, and it looked like their mother was lying about it. Rexburg police returned to Lori's home the next day with more questions, only to find Lori and Chad had fled. The newlyweds had slipped away to Hawaii, literally leaving in the middle of the night, just as the investigation into the missing kids heated up. It was a brazen move that made headlines nationwide. The case of the, quote, Doomsday mom had begun to grip the public. 2 children were missing under chilling circumstances. An ever-growing string of mysterious deaths surrounded their mother, and that mother was on a romantic jaunt in Hawaii with her 5th husband, a self-proclaimed prophet. Media outlets couldn't get enough of the story. People asked, where is Tylee and JJ? What do Chad and Lori know? The FBI got involved, joining local police from Idaho and Arizona in a frantic search for the children. With Lori and Chad suntanning in Kauai and refusing to cooperate, suspicion skyrocketed, to say the least. Now, by December of 2019, Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell were the target of a full-scale, multi-state investigation. The once quiet town of Rexburg was now swarming with investigators and news crews. The public learned of Lori's bizarre cult-like beliefs, the zombie talk, the pattern of deaths, pressure mounted to find the missing kids or to hold someone accountable. Now, in a dramatic move, the Fremont County Sheriff in Idaho obtained a court order to exhume Tammy Daybell's body, suspecting her death was not so natural after all. And thank God he did. Tammy's body was dug up on December 11, 2019, and a proper autopsy was finally conducted, the results of which later confirmed she'd been murdered. Asphyxiation, prosecutors believe. Now, that same December, another twist. Lori's brother, an alleged henchman, Alex Cox, dropped dead under mysterious circumstances. Alex collapsed in his bathroom in Arizona on December 12th and died before help arrived. Ironically, the county medical examiner ruled his death natural, a blood clot. Though some can't help but wonder if karma caught up to him. Alex died one day after Tammy was exhumed, having carried many of the Vallow-Daybell secrets to his grave. Now, before he died, Alex had confided to his new wife, Zelima, that he felt he might be the fall guy for Lori and Chad's plans. It seems even Alex, who had dutifully done Lori's bidding, sensed the net closing in. The authorities were done playing cat and mouse with Lori. On January 25th, 2020, the state of Idaho issued an ultimatum. Lori Vallow was ordered to produce Tylee and JJ within 5 days, alive, or face legal consequences. Now, the deadline came and went with Lori providing no sign of the children. So on February 20th, 2020, Lori Vallow-Daybell was arrested by police in Kauai, Hawaii. When officers cuffed her, Lori finally dropped her sunny facade, scowling in her mugshot. She fought extradition, but 2 weeks later, she was hauled back to Idaho in handcuffs for more baked potatoes. Now, crowds gathered at the airport and outside the courthouse, screaming, quote, "Where are the children, Lori?" as the so-called cult mom was led in the courthouse in an orange jumpsuit. Still, Lori arrogantly refused to say a word about Tylee or JJ's fate. Chad Daybell, for the moment, remained free in Idaho, closely watched by investigators but not yet charged. Now, for months, he had stayed quiet, publishing no more books, giving no interviews, and somehow continuing to play the grieving widower, even attending a memorial for Tammy as if he weren't responsible. But Chad's freedom was about to end in the most dramatic way imaginable. On a cloudy morning, June 9th, 2020, FBI agents, Rexburg police, and county deputies executed a search warrant at Chad Daybell's Salem, Idaho property. Chad sat in a car, watching nervously as investigators brought in backhoes and began to methodically dig in his backyard. Now, he had to know what they would find. For months, speculation ran rampant that the children might be buried somewhere on Chad's land. After all, Alex's phone had pinged there on the critical dates, and now that grim theory was about to be confirmed. Under a tree, in a patch of recently disturbed earth, searchers found what looked like a clandestine grave. As Detective Ray Hermosillo later described in court, a strong odor of human decomposition hung in the air as they removed sod and the soil. Then, the heartbreaking reveal. Tiny hands and arms, bound with duct tape. The remains of a little boy in red pajamas emerged from the dirt. J.J. Vallow, duct taped, wrapped in a plastic bag, and buried like trash. Even seasoned law enforcement wept. J.J.'s grandfather, Larry Woodcock, watching the search from afar, broke down in sobs, hearing that his grandson had been found murdered, still wearing his favorite red PJs. Now nearby, in what had been the Daybell family's pet cemetery, another set of remains was unearthed. These were different, charred, dismembered, and burned beyond recognition. Investigators found bits of bone and flesh, a mass of human remains that had been subjected to fire and perhaps corrosive chemicals. It was a horror scene. Through dental records and DNA, those remains were soon identified as 16-year-old Tylee Ryan. The spot where Tylee had been buried was precisely where Chad had casually mentioned shooting a raccoon months before. Needless to say, no raccoon was found. The only creatures possessed on that property were Chad and Lori themselves, possessed by evil and cruelty almost beyond comprehension. Now, as the bodies were discovered, Chad left the property as investigators began digging, but was stopped by officers about a mile away. There, on June 9th, 2020, Chad Daybell was finally arrested, caught literally red-handed with graves in his backyard. The community of Rexburg, which months earlier had rallied with prayer vigils and missing posters for the kids, now erected a memorial of teddy bears and flowers along Chad's fence. The tragic search had come to an end. Tylee and JJ had been found, but not as anyone had prayed. The grandparents, Kay and Larry, declared it the worst news ever, yet thanked law enforcement for giving the family closure. The story that had begun as a missing persons case was now undeniably a triple homicide investigation, with Tammy's suspicious death also in play. Now, over the next year, the case against Lori and Chad grew ironclad. In May of 2021, an Idaho grand jury indicted both Lori Vallow-Daybell and Chad Daybell on multiple counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder for the deaths of Tylee, JJ, and Tammy Daybell. Chad was additionally charged with the murder of Tammy, and Lori was charged with grand theft for continuing to draw the children's Social Security benefits after their deaths. Arizona prosecutors also weren't done with Lori. She was indicted there for conspiring with Alex to murder her ex-husband, Charles Vallow, and for the attempt on Brandon Bordeaux. It seemed everywhere Lori and Chad went, suspicious deaths followed. As the legal process continued to move forward, shocking details continued to emerge. Lori was found mentally unfit in mid-2021 and sent to a psychiatric facility for treatment. She spent about 10 months undergoing restoration to competency. Perhaps not surprising given the grandiosity of her delusions, but by April of 2022, Lori was ruled competent to stand trial. Both she and Chad pleaded not guilty to all the charges. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty against Chad Daybell, and initially for Lori as well. The couple, once united in life, now faced the ultimate punishment, and their trials loomed. The wheels of justice turned slowly but relentlessly, as they tend to do. Now, by 2023, more than 3 years had passed since the children's bodies were found, and the public eagerly awaited Lori and Chad's reckoning. Lori's trial was severed from Chad's due to some evidence issues and Lori's right to a speedy trial, meaning each would face a jury separately. Chad's lawyers successfully pushed his trial to 2024, but Lori's day in court arrived in the spring of 2023. Now, in April of 2023, in a Boise, Idaho courtroom, Lori Vallow-Daybell stood trial for the murders of Tylee, JJ, and the conspiracy to murder Tammy Daybell. The death penalty had been taken off the table for Lori after a judge agreed her defense hadn't had time to review new evidence. Thus, she faced life in prison if convicted, a small mercy for the woman dubbed the Doomsday Mom. The trial lasted 6 weeks and transfixed the nation. Prosecutors laid out the gruesome evidence: the tangled remains of Tylee, JJ's duct-taped body, the autopsy of Tammy showing restraint and asphyxia. Jurors saw photos that made some of them cry or avert their gaze, images of what was left of these beautiful children. Witness after witness testified about Lori and Chad's bizarre cult beliefs. Melanie Gibb recounted how Lori called people zombies and believed evil spirits overtook them. An FBI analyst read aloud text messages of Chad and Lori, cooing about their eternal love while plotting deaths. Perhaps the most damning was Lori's blunt lack of remorse. In a jailhouse phone call played for the jury, her only concern was that Melanie had made her look bad by revealing Lori's lies about JJ. Now, throughout the trial, Lori sat stone-faced, occasionally smirking or whispering to her attorneys. Now, many noticed when graphic images of her slain children were shown, Lori looked away, not in horror, but as if bored. On May 12, 2023, the verdict came swift and thunderous. Guilty on all charges. Lori Vallow-Daybell was convicted of the first-degree murders of Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow, the conspiracy to murder Tammy Daybell, and grand theft for stealing the kids' benefits. She showed no visible emotion as the judge read the jury's findings. But across the courtroom, Kay and Larry Woodcock quietly sobbed and held hands. Justice, at long last, for their grandchildren. The jurors later said that the evidence of Lori's role was overwhelming. Even if she didn't physically kill the children with her own hands, she was the mastermind who conspired and set these killings in motion. At Lori's sentencing in July 2023, Judge Stephen Boyce minced no words. He sentenced Lori to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the maximum, plus an additional 10 years for the financial crimes. Then he addressed Lori directly. In a scathing rebuke, Judge Boyce told her, "You had so many other options. You could have gotten divorced. You could have found someone else to take care of those kids. Instead, you chose the most evil and destructive path possible." He condemned how she justified all of this by going down a bizarre religious rabbit hole, one she hadn't renounced. Even at sentencing, Lori astonishingly proclaimed that the spirits of Tylee and JJ were happy in heaven and that she communicates with them. To the end, she clung to her delusions, or pretended to, in hopes of seeming insane. The judge was unswayed, calling her crimes heinous and egregious. He ordered her to spend the rest of her skanky life in a concrete cell. Now, meanwhile, I said skanky, by the way, not the judge. Meanwhile, Chad Daybell's day of judgment arrived in 2024, in April of 2024. Almost a year after Lori's trial, Chad faced his own jury in Ada County, Ohio, after a change of venue. By now, Chad's defense had crumbled. His only hope was to pin everything on Lori or Alex Cox. His children, the Daybell kids who initially supported him, didn't even show up to court. The evidence against Chad was largely the same, with one addition: proof that he murdered Tammy Daybell for money. By the way, he collected her life insurance and was the beneficiary of her retirement funds. But after weeks of testimony, on May 30th, 2024, the jury found Chad Daybell guilty on all counts: the murders of Tammy, Tylee, and JJ, plus related conspiracy and fraud charges. Now, 2 days later, in a separate proceeding for sentencing, that same jury decided Chad should pay the ultimate price. On June 1st, 2024, Chad Daybell was sentenced to death for his crimes. As the judge affirmed the sentence, Chad reportedly showed the first glimmer of emotion anyone had seen. He teared up, perhaps realizing that the apocalypse he was now facing was the Idaho execution chamber. Barring successful appeals, Chad will one day be executed by the state, dying infamously as a condemned killer. Now, even with these convictions, the saga isn't completely over. Lori Vallow still faces charges in Arizona for conspiring in Charles Vallow's murder and the attempted murder of Brandon Bordeaux. Those cases await trial, meaning additional exposure of Lori's wrongdoing outside Idaho. But no matter what happens in Arizona courts, Lori will never walk free again. Both she and Chad are spending their final days in prison garb, a far cry from the white and khaki beachwear of their Hawaii wedding. Now, in prison, Lori has reportedly been teaching Bible study to other inmates, incredibly casting herself as a spiritual leader even now. It seems the Doomsday duo's delusions have only met their earthly doom. The story of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell is a tale of how fanaticism and lust can implode into unspeakable violence. It's a saga that forced us to ask hard questions about the thin line between unconventional religious beliefs and dangerous extremism. Lori and Chad didn't form a huge cult or a secret compound. They lived among neighbors, went to Disney World, made podcast videos. Yet, in the span of less than 1 year, this couple left a trail of 5 bodies: Lori's 2 children, 2 former spouses, and a would-be victim who narrowly escaped. They nearly got away with it by cloaking their crimes in talk of prophecy and casting out demons. This case reminds us that evil can wear a smile and spout scripture while doing the devil's work. Now, in the wake of the trials, many are still grappling with why. How did a loving mother turn into a murderer? How did a benign doomsday author become a killer? The simple answer is greed, lust, and power. Lori wanted to discard one life and start anew with Chad. Chad wanted to be with Lori and not Tammy. Together, they thought God ordained it. They collected life insurance money and children's social security checks along the way, as if financial gain was part of God's plan. It's a stark reminder of the human capacity for self-deception, wrapped up in their grandiose narrative of chosen ones and zombie slave. They gave themselves permission to do the unthinkable. As the prosecutor in Lori's case said, they used doomsday beliefs to justify murder. The societal impact of this case has been profound. It's prompted soul-searching in religious communities about fringe prophets. It's made law enforcement more alert to the warning signs of family annihilators, using bizarre justifications. The case has been featured on documentaries, podcasts like this one, and news specials, becoming a cautionary tale of a modern-day cult mentality. Perhaps the most important impact has been the rallying of love and support around the real victims, Tylee and JJ. The world got to know Tylee's bright smile and JJ's boundless energy through photos and stories. Strangers sent quilts, flowers, and messages when their remains were found. A collective howl of grief that 2 children suffered such betrayal. And in the end, Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell got the doomsday they deserved. Not the glorious translation to heaven they envisioned, but a reckoning here on earth by judge and jury. Lori will grow old in a concrete cell, and Chad will likely die on death row before the state ever needs to carry out its sentence. They believed in evil spirits, but the only evil present was within themselves. Now, as the cell doors clanged shut, Lori and Chad learned that there was no escaping earthly justice. The tragic fate of Tyler Ryan and J.J. Vallow stands as a haunting reminder when devotion turns to delusion and faith to fanaticism. The damage left behind can be immeasurable. May we remember the innocent lives lost, and may we always be wary of those who claim to fight demons while becoming demons themselves. Now, an update. In April of 2025, Lori Vallow-Daybell was convicted in Arizona for conspiring to murder her estranged husband, Charles Vallow, in 2019. This verdict adds to her existing life sentences for the murders of her 2 children and her then boyfriend's wife. Prosecutors argued that Lori and her brother, Alex Cox, plotted Charles's death to access his life insurance and further her relationship with Chad Daybell. Lori represented herself during the trial and claimed the shooting was in self-defense, but the jury found her guilty after brief deliberations. She is scheduled to face another trial in June 2025 for allegedly conspiring to murder her niece's ex-husband, Brandon Bordeaux, who survived an attempted shooting in 2019. Sentencing for the Charles Vallow case will occur after this upcoming trial. So while Lori Vallow once fancied herself a god preparing for the second coming, she's now just another inmate preparing for Chow. And as for Chad Daybell, the only visions in his future, steel bars and the long shadow of death row. In the end, the Doomsday came. But it wasn't heavenly. It was handcuffs, a guilty verdict, and justice served cold. Thank you for listening to this episode of Creepalachia. Be sure to hug your loved ones a little tighter tonight. And join us next time for another journey into the shadows where few dare to tread. Before you leave, be sure to like this video, subscribe to Creepalachia if you haven't. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, take a minute, leave a review. Those reviews will really help the show be found. I am so appreciative of the growth of this channel. And check out Creepalachia.tv, our new website, which will be holding merch, which is almost available and will be releasing soon. Again, I appreciate you all, and always remember, above all else, long live Appalachia.